John, how long do you plan to keep deceiving me? I already know that Sam is not your nephew but your biological son. I shouted from the bedroom. On the first day after our wedding, my husband John brought a boy home, claiming he was his nephew and asked me to take good care of him. To my surprise, the child started cursing at me as soon as he saw me. If it weren't for John's ex-wife finding me, I would have remained in the dark.
So what? You married me, which makes you his stepmother. Don't you want to take care of him?
This was clearly unreasonable.
John, this is outright fraud. Do you believe I won't go to court and sue you right now?
After all, when we first met, John claimed he had never been in a relationship and had never even held a woman's hand. Now, suddenly, there's a son this big.
It's too late for regrets now. The court won't care about our family matters.
He didn't realize his mistake at all.
Divorce. I want a divorce.
With that, I went back to my parents' house. But it wasn't long before John came after me. He must have been scared of the divorce, which is why he hurried to win me back.
Honey, I'm sorry. I was too impulsive before. I shouldn't have spoken to you like that, but I have my reasons for this situation.
I shook off his hand. To me, a lie is a lie, and whatever John said now was just an excuse to defend his mistake.
Actually, I was a victim in that previous marriage too. My ex-wife cheated on me with the accountant at the factory, and they conspired to take a lot of my money. Such a woman would only be a bad influence on my son. I believe children are innocent, which is why I thought we could take care of him together. I didn't tell you before because I was afraid you wouldn't accept it. But now I truly know I was wrong. Please forgive me. I've already given Sam's guardianship to my ex-wife. From now on, it will just be the two of us, and I promise nothing will disturb you again. Please give me another chance, okay?
Looking at John's sincere face, I felt a bit swayed. Since our marriage, John had indeed treated me well, gentle and considerate. He had even started his own shoe factory from scratch. Economically and emotionally, he was quite good. But remembering his impatient tone when I confronted him at home not long ago made me angry again, so I decided to let him stew for a while. However, just after John left, the matchmaker who introduced us, Mrs. Smith, came by. As soon as she spoke, I knew John had sent her.
John is just too honest, which is why he got deceived by that woman outside. Look at how well he has treated you during this time. He really cares about you, which is why he was worried you would be upset. To be blunt, even though John is remarried, he is successful, has a house and a car, and treats you well. Such a man is hard to find.
The matchmaker, Mrs. Smith, held my hand and persuaded me for a while. After some thought, I realized she had a point. Given my age, a separation wouldn't benefit me. Besides, a separated woman doesn't usually marry well. But I still cared about my dignity, so I kept a cold face and reluctantly nodded. That evening, John drove to pick me up and take me home. After this incident, neither of us mentioned Sam again, and life seemed to gradually improve. I felt a bit soft-hearted. Despite John's deliberate concealment, he hadn't done anything wrong as a father. After all, no one wants their child to suffer with their mother. I remembered how his ex-wife came to me, slapped me without a word, and hurled the most awful insults. I felt sorry for Sam, but I had to live my own life. These days, I often cooked John's favorite meals. One evening, while John was showering, I noticed someone sending him numerous messages. Initially, I didn't want to interfere, but the person kept messaging, unlike a factory client. Driven by curiosity, I opened his phone and discovered that person was sharing their daily life with John, even trivial details like what they ate and when they got home. A woman's intuition told me something was off. I scrolled through their chat history and found numerous money transfers between them, ranging from small amounts to thousands, happening frequently. The other person often sent affectionate emojis, appearing very clingy. Their relationship was definitely not simple. To my surprise, the girl's social media photos showed she was barely an adult, looking very young and innocent. A young, pretty girl should rely on her own efforts, not engage in such behavior. My face darkened. I couldn't believe John had the audacity to be unfaithful. At that moment, the shower stopped. I quickly put the phone back and acted nonchalant. When John came out, I casually asked,
"How much money do you have on hand? My friend Emily wanted to borrow some to buy a house, but I thought I should discuss it with you first."
My salary card is with you, isn't it? I don't have any money on hand.
"But it's our joint property, right? We can't just give it away without clarity, don't you think?"
John's expression remained unchanged. He took his phone and went into the study. I wasn't sure if he understood my hint. I didn't plan to confront John directly. Instead, I intended to gather solid evidence and make those two pay for their actions. I didn't expect to catch them so quickly. In the morning, I secretly checked John's phone and saw they planned to meet at the mall on Saturday to buy a phone. That mistress was really audacious. I smirked and decided to follow John on Saturday. I wanted to see his reaction when he saw me. Saturday afternoon. As John prepared to leave, I asked,
"Where are you going?"
"A client wants to meet, so I probably won't be back for dinner tonight." After saying this, he glanced at the time and turned to leave. I quickly followed him out, feeling a growing chill in my heart. Especially when I saw them meeting, and the young girl affectionately holding John's arm, I couldn't help but think, was John's kindness to me all a lie? Watching them laugh and walk into the mall, it was clear they had known each other for quite some time. John had been fooling around behind my back all along.
I even started to think that his divorce from his ex-wife wasn't entirely her fault. Maybe neither of them were any good.
They walked into a phone store next. They spent a long time at the counter, with the girl even wrapping her arms around John's neck, whispering something in his ear. I took out my phone and snapped several photos of them, then walked in with a cold expression. The moment John saw me, his face changed instantly, confirming my suspicions.
Lily, what are you doing here?
The girl stood behind John, not letting go of his hand even after seeing me, looking fearless.
John, do you have any shame? How old is she? You even have the nerve to mess with a young girl? You're despicable.
I instinctively thought that John must have deceived this girl.
Lily, please don't talk nonsense. Let's discuss this at home. There are so many people watching.
But I shook him off forcefully, sneering.
You can do such sneaky things and still have the nerve to ask me to go home to talk? You're cheating right under my nose. You're really something.
She's his daughter.
What?
I looked at the two of them, noticing they did look somewhat alike, but... John returned the phone to the counter and pulled me outside. It took me a while to react, grabbing his collar and demanding,
John, who is that girl? Don't you only have a son?
Besides, the girl looked like she was already in her teens. The matchmaker had told me John had only been married to his ex-wife for a few years. I was completely confused.
She is indeed my daughter, but she's from my first marriage.
First marriage? How many times have you been married?
Last time, when I found out John had deceived me about having an ex-wife and a son, I reluctantly forgave him. But now there's another ex-wife? I had no idea John was so capable.
So you've been lying to me all along. You did it before, and you're doing it again. You're really something.
With a son and a daughter, why do you even need a wife like me? I had actually believed the matchmaker's words, thinking John was an honest, good man. Now it all seemed so ironic. Just then, a figure suddenly rushed over from a distance and slapped me to the ground before I could react.
You wretch.
I was slightly taken aback, then looked up at the girl who rushed out. Her face no longer showed any innocence, but rather anger and disdain.
I don't know what my dad sees in you. You don't give him any face in public. A woman like you isn't even fit to carry my dad's shoes in the factory.
That's enough, Jenny. You should go back. I'll handle this myself.
John stepped forward, but his daughter ignored him and shook off his hand. She looked at me as if I were an enemy.
Stepmothers are always stepmothers. You've just gotten married and you're already so arrogant. If more time passes, won't you be even worse? You're just an outsider. My dad and I are the real family.
The girl's arrogance was infuriating, but I held back my words. After all, we were still standing at the mall entrance, and John seemed embarrassed, quickly pulling Jenny aside and speaking to her in a low voice. Watching this scene, I turned and left. This time, I didn't go back to my parents' house but went to Emily's place. I wanted to sort out everything that had happened recently and didn't want to hear John's explanations anymore. Thinking about how he had promised me last time that there were no more secrets, I found it laughable. Is this what he meant by no more lies?
Is he even human? Having a son was one thing, but now there's a grown daughter too. How many times has he been married? Didn't he swear during the matchmaking that he had never even held a girl's hand?
I sighed heavily, feeling a headache coming on. But Emily's words reminded me of something. First, there was the young son, now the older daughter. How many times has John been married? Will another child pop up in a few days? When we first met, I had considered this. John wasn't young, yet he claimed to have no past relationships. It didn't seem right, but I thought he was just inexperienced in love. I never imagined it would be like this.
What's there to think about? You must divorce him. Without basic trust in a marriage, what are you holding on to?
I nodded. Divorce is inevitable, but first, I need to find out the truth. Moreover, John seemed honest but had deceived me thoroughly. Should I let him off so easily? Absolutely not. I contacted John's closest friend and, under pressure, got him to confess.
Actually, this is John's third marriage. He had 2 wives before you, and he has children with each of them.
He couldn't even look me in the eye, probably feeling that John's deceitful behavior was despicable. The answer was as I expected. He had a daughter, Jenny, with his first wife, then a son, Sam, with his second wife. And I was the third. What were the reasons for the divorces? I couldn't understand. Were all the divorces due to the wives' infidelity?
Because, well, men sometimes have a more open social life, and with John's job requiring frequent socializing, it's inevitable he'll come into contact with some women. His previous wives were just too petty to accept it, which led to the divorces.
Although the matchmaker's words were biased towards John, I understood her point. It was probably John's flirtations over the years that led to his failed marriages. Even when he came to reconcile with me last time, he was lying. Before leaving, I had checked John's brother's phone and saw their chat history. This confirmed my suspicions. John was a scoundrel. He claimed to be a victim, but I even saw how he and his brother talked about me in their messages.
She's pretty, but a bit too old. Young girls are better.
Reading those filthy comments about me made me feel disgusted. Divorcing him would be too easy on him. However, I noticed a new name in their chat history. A woman named Catherine. It seemed she was John's next target. I decided to start with her, hoping it would be a significant blow to John. On my way back, I received a call from John. I knew his brother had tipped him off, and now John was worried I'd make a scene, so he quickly reached out to me.
Let's meet. There are some things I think we should discuss in person.
I didn't refuse and agreed to meet. We arranged to meet at a cafe. Before going in, I called Emily to explain the situation.
Be careful. If he tries anything, call the police immediately, okay?
Don't worry, I'll be fine.
When we met, John was as gentle and considerate as ever, showing no signs of deceit. But I was already disillusioned and had no affection left for him. He had deceived me about something so significant, crossing my bottom line.
I'm sorry. I know I can't explain this, but I was worried you'd be angry, so I kept it from you. My first wife had settled abroad, but for some reason, she suddenly came back. But don't worry, they'll leave soon and won't disturb our lives.
Do you still think what I care about is whether they disturb us or not?
For me, becoming a stepmother wasn't an issue. I believe children are innocent and shouldn't bear the consequences of their parents' divorce. What I truly cared about was John's deceit and his excuses now.
Yes, but regardless of what you care about, I should apologize. I was wrong before. Now, whatever you want to know, I'll be honest. Is that okay?
If he had said this a few days earlier, we wouldn't be in this situation. But it's too late.
John, I've seen your chat records with Jean Ben. I know exactly how you talked about me behind my back.
So what do you want now? I've apologized and explained, and even sent my son away. What more do you want?
John suddenly stood up, furious, which really startled me. The surrounding customers also started looking our way.
Is this your attitude when apologizing?
I wasn't intimidated by John at all. If his voice was loud, mine was louder. When it comes to being assertive, I've never lost to anyone, especially when I'm in the right. John sighed and sat back down, but his face was still dark.
You deceived me into marriage, and even after, you were not faithful, flirting with female employees at the factory. Do you think a few words of apology can make up for that?
If apologies were enough, we wouldn't need the police.
Grace, don't push it. At your age, if I hadn't chosen you, you probably wouldn't even be married now.
Unable to win the argument, he started belittling me, as if our marriage was a favor to me. I felt there was nothing more to say to John. Coming to this meeting was the most foolish decision, just a waste of time. But as I was about to leave, John blocked my way.
Come home with me. You're a married woman living outside. Have some decency. Even if you don't care, I do.
Now, people around us started pointing fingers, probably thinking I was some kind of indecent woman.
Scumbag. Let's get a divorce.
I grabbed my bag and walked out, with John chasing after me. Luckily, Emily had already driven up to the entrance. I got into the car without a word.
Get lost, or you'll regret it.
On the way back, I suddenly thought of something. John had deceived me, but I remembered Mrs. Smith had praised him to the skies initially. I asked Emily to take me to Mrs. Smith's house. She seemed unaware of the extent of my issues with John, so she welcomed me warmly.
Mrs. Johnson, did you know John had been married twice before?
Faced with my stern question, Mrs. Johnson's face stiffened slightly, then she quickly shook her head.
What are you talking about? John married twice? I didn't know that. How did you find out?
Do you really know nothing?
As a matchmaker, how could she not know the basic details before introducing someone?
It's getting late. I want to sleep. Why don't you go home first, Lily? We can talk later. I'll ask John to pick you up.
One moment she was all smiles, and the next her expression changed.
I saw her take out her phone and immediately rushed to grab it. Hey, what are you doing?
Mrs. Smith was anxious when she saw me reaching for her phone, but I quickly opened her chat history with John. Sure enough, they had been in frequent contact, and Mrs. Smith had even agreed to help John deceive me into marriage. She had received a red envelope of 20,000 yuan from John, and he had promised her a big red envelope if I got pregnant and had a child.
They had been conspiring to deceive me from the start.
I was shocked and took pictures of the chat records, just in case things got worse. These could serve as evidence.
How can you just grab someone else's things? You're shameless. Even if John has 2 kids, he is successful now and has given you a good life. Being a stepmother isn't that bad. Many people would love to have this opportunity.
If it's so good, why didn't you marry him yourself?
If it was really that good, why did they have to lie to me in the first place? I didn't listen to Mrs. Smith anymore and left their house.
This time I was determined to get a divorce.
But before that, I needed solid evidence of John's infidelity.
I contacted a private investigator to follow John and find out more about this woman named Catherine.
Meanwhile, I had a lawyer draft a divorce agreement, but it didn't mention John's infidelity.
Since we don't have solid evidence yet, citing infidelity as the reason for divorce won't be convincing and could easily be dismissed by your husband. It's better to negotiate first. If he agrees to sign the divorce papers, that's the best outcome. If not, we can present the evidence of infidelity.
Let's do as you say.
I arranged to meet John privately and pushed the divorce agreement in front of him.
If you sign this now, I can pretend none of this ever happened, and we can go our separate ways.
You want a divorce and expect me to give you half of my assets, including all the properties? Grace, are you dreaming?
I quietly watched John, and after he finished complaining, I calmly said,
You and Mrs. Smith conspired to deceive me into marriage. I have evidence on my phone. This is what you owe me.
You didn't do your homework before marriage, and now you blame me?
John then tore the divorce agreement into pieces and threw them on the ground.
I will never agree to a divorce.
If you don't agree to settle this privately, I'll have to take legal action. Once it goes to court, there's no turning back, and even your factory will be affected. I doubt anyone would want to do business with a boss with a tarnished marriage record.
John surely knew the importance of the situation. As expected, after hearing what I said, he became visibly anxious.
Wait a minute. We can discuss this. Don't be in such a hurry to leave. No matter what, I still have feelings for you. Otherwise, I wouldn't have spent so much money to meet you. Look at how well I've treated you after we got married.
John probably saw my firm attitude and now wanted to play the emotional card.
Are you done? If so, I'm leaving.
If you really want a separation, I can agree to sign the papers, but didn't I already tear them up?
Don't worry, I'll have the lawyer draft a new one and send it to you after signing.
Honestly, I was a bit surprised that John agreed to the separation so easily and was even willing to split the assets with me. I suddenly started to suspect he might have some hidden agenda. After all, the John I knew as a businessman would never do anything against his own interests. My suspicions were confirmed 2 days later. After I sent the signed papers to John, he called me the next day.
Let's meet up. I think some of the terms in the agreement need to be adjusted.
If you have any issues, you can contact my lawyer directly. Narrator, unfriendly. I didn't want to see John at all.
Moreover, when I received the agreement, I had carefully reviewed every word. There wasn't even a typo, let alone any issues.
Lily, does our relationship have to end like this? You won't even meet me? I won't hurt you. I just think some clauses need further discussion. You're right, I deceived you before. I want to make it up to you. Let's part on good terms, okay?
I thought he was worried that if things got out of hand, it would affect his business at the factory, so he was now trying to compromise. After some hesitation, I agreed to meet. I wanted to see what John had up his sleeve. When we met, he placed the original agreement in front of me.
Since we're splitting assets, we should also clarify our debts.
Debts? I was slightly stunned, almost thinking I misheard. What debts could there be between John and me?
Our marital home, the car you're driving now, and the dowry I gave to your family were all borrowed from high-interest loans. The money hasn't been repaid yet. Since you want a separation, you should repay this money. Including interest, it's $800,000. Pay this amount, and I'll sign the papers immediately.
I was shocked, looking at John in disbelief. So this was his real purpose for meeting today. I didn't expect John to be so shameless. Our marital home was a second-hand house in a small city, and the car was a small one worth less than $100,000. Even adding everything up, it wouldn't exceed $500,000. Since our marriage, John had indeed treated me well, gentle and considerate. He had even started his own shoe factory from scratch. Economically and emotionally, he was quite good.
But remembering his impatient tone when I confronted him at home not long ago made me angry again, so I decided to let him stew for a while.
However, just after John left, the matchmaker who introduced us, Mrs. Smith, came by.
Grace, John is just too honest, which is why he got deceived by that woman outside. Look at how well he has treated you during this time. He really cares about you, which is why he was worried you would be upset.
To be blunt, even though John is remarried, he is successful, has a house and a car, and treats you well. Such a man is hard to find.
Of course, during this time, John didn't give up on trying to win me back. He mostly used money as a talking point, but I didn't want to deal with him at all. Until a week later, we finally met in court. The moment he saw me, John glared at me and growled.
Grace, you really surprised me by taking this to court. Do you think you won't have to repay the money you owe me by doing this? How naive.
Seeing John's smug expression, I quietly sat to the side without saying a word. Soon, my lawyer submitted the evidence.
First, Mr. John conspired with Mrs. Smith to deceive my client into marriage. He falsely claimed to be single with no past relationships and bribed Mrs. Smith to corroborate his story. After the marriage, it was discovered he had been married 3 times. When my client filed for separation, John even threatened her with high-interest loans, claiming the daily interest was $10,000. Most importantly, John was unfaithful during the marriage.
I raised an eyebrow at John, seeing his face turn pale as he stood up to explain.
That's not true. Don't talk nonsense.
Sit down. It's not your turn to speak.
The judge's gavel struck, scaring John into silence. He had been so arrogant just now, but now he looked utterly defeated. I smirked and submitted the evidence. When the photos were displayed, everyone gasped. John sat on the bench, looking like a lost soul, staring blankly at the table. This is the price of crossing me. Soon, the judge declared our separation, and we just had to wait for the court documents to be processed. I stood up and looked at John with disdain.
John, you brought this upon yourself. You have no one else to blame.
As for Mrs. Johnson, who was in cahoots with him, she was also arrested for fraud and concealment of crimes. She screamed her innocence, but no one listened. Meanwhile, John's factory was exposed for taking kickbacks and cutting corners. He had previously suppressed the news, but now, with his reputation in ruins, the factory was also declining. In the end, John was sentenced to prison for multiple offenses. As he was escorted past me by the police, he glared at me defiantly.
Grace, I really underestimated you. I didn't expect you to be so ruthless. I curse you to never find happiness or get married.
Whether I get married or not is none of your concern.
I coldly smiled as I watched John get into the police car, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. Not long after, I received the court's approval documents, and my separation from John was finalized. Bad people will always face consequences, and those who think they can hide their crimes with deceit will eventually pay the price. After this ordeal, I'm in no rush to get married again. In fact, I find being alone quite liberating. I sold the properties I was awarded and donated the money to an orphanage. Then, I moved away from the city to start a new life of my own.